everyone, it's Shannon Pelletier here for Hero Arts. In this video we are going to create this birthday card with the new April My Monthly Hero kit. Let's start with the kit itself. Included in the kit is this large stamp set with a ton of plants and wildlife that are iconic to Australia. You'll also get all these dies. These die cut out all the images included in the stamp set. And then there's this stencil that's just really awesome, very versatile. You can make it look like water or like a desert landscape, really cool. I'm going to start with this small panel. This panel is 3 3/8 by 4 5/8. It's made out of Dove White cardstock, and I'm going to center the stencil over the panel, making sure that I get a bit of the ground and the sky onto this panel. I then am going to use some painter's tape to hold the stencil and the panel in place. I'm also going to tape off the sky with a long strip of painter's tape. You do want to make sure though that your painter's tapes, you remove some of the stick before you applied it onto your paper, and you can do that just by placing it down onto your clothing, and that will remove some of the stick. I'm going to ink blend the bottom portion or the ground here, starting with pumpkin pie, and I'm going to go kind of heavy-handed here because I will ink blend later lighter, so it's okay to be a little heavy-handed with when we're blending over the stencil for this card. Then I'm moving on to a darker color. This is caramel. I'm just going to ink blend the very bottom of our panel. This is just going to create a nice little gradation for our ground, and I think it will really kind of weight it down and create a nice sense of weight. So I'm now going to carefully remove that painter's tape, remove the painter's tape over the sky because I'm now going to ink blend the sky, and then I'm going to grab that long piece of painter's tape again and tape off the ground that I just ink blended and protect that from the blue that I'm going to use for the sky. I have Splash Reactive ink here. I am also going to create a nice gradation with this. It's going to be a little bit more heavy-handed at the top of the panel and then lighten or blend out as I move down towards the ground. This will just create a nice gradation for our sky and add a little bit more interest. And this stencil does include a sun or a moon, depending on what kind of scene you're creating, and we will add some color to that later. Now that I finished blending the sky, I'm then going to remove the stencil, and now I'm going to add a little bit more details to the ground. I'm going to tape off the sky again with that same piece of painter's tape, and I'm going to start by just ink blending wherever the stencil was again with those same two kind of browns, starting with pumpkin pie and then moving on to caramel. This is just going to make sure those areas where the stencil was aren't white anymore. It just adds a little bit more color and I think a little bit more depth. Now I'm going to add some ink spots. So I smushed out caramel onto my mat here, then I added some water, and then I picked up that diluted ink with my brush, and I'm now just tapping my finger on the brush to release small little droplets of ink. That's going to really create the look of sand or dirt, so really will enhance, I think, the texture of this. Now I'm going to carefully remove that painter's tape, and then I will set this panel aside to dry before I move on to the next step. Here it is all dry, and now we're going to move on to creating a couple of masks. So just like you would create masks when out of stamps, we're going to create a mask with our stencil. I'm going to, instead of stamp, I'm going to ink blend over the stencil to transfer the stencil image onto this 80-pound or 65, anything kind of a lightweight cardstock. You could definitely use copy paper or a post-it note if you'd rather, just something lightweight so it's easy to cut. And I'm creating two, so I did it twice onto this panel, and now I'm going to cut these stencils out. So to start with the first sun here, I'm going to cut out the sun itself. And don't worry about going in and cutting off some of the clouds. That's okay. We basically want to cut out this circle shape. It's okay for those top two clouds kind of to get cut off, but for the bottom clouds I do want to make sure that when I ink blend the sky a little bit more, they do get a little bit of the blue. So I'm going to cut right along the edge of these clouds that are at the bottom of the sun. You could just cut a circle if you'd rather, but I do think it kind of makes a cleaner look if you cut right along the edge. So you could just use a circle die and die cut a circle you rather to create a circle that's obviously about the same size as the sun. Now the second mask, this is going to be used to actually ink blend the sun itself, and this mask is going to be used to protect the clouds, so a little bit different. The first sun is the first mask we created, which is almost just a circle, is going to protect the sun, and the second mask that we're creating now is going to protect like the clouds and keep them blue. So for this mask, I'm carefully cutting out the circle again, but I'm also cutting around the clouds this time, and even cutting a little white border, because the mask kind of creates a little white border around the clouds, and I'm just kind of mimicking that look so it looks very cohesive. So I'm just kind of finishing up cutting around that little, or creating my own little white border around that cloud, and then I will move down to the bottom sections of clouds and repeat that same process. And again, I had to kind of cut into the mask itself to kind of get into that intersection and cut it out, but that's okay because we can tape it back together when we place it down onto our panel and start doing our ink blending. So that actually completes my two masks here. The top or first mask that we created will protect the sun, and the second mask we created will actually protect the clouds. And this will make more sense when we actually start to use them with our sky. So since I'm going to do some final ink blending to the sky, I'm going to first tape off the ground to protect that. Then I've grabbed a little piece of micropore tape and I rolled it, and I'm going to use that to secure our first mask, the mask that's basically a circle, onto our panel. I'm going to do some light ink blending. This is basically how we created the bottom. Just do a little bit more ink blending with the same color, but a little bit lighter this time, to kind of fill in the areas that the stencil left white. Now that I finished the sky, I'm then going to carefully remove that first mask, and now I'm going to place the second mask. Now this mask is just going to protect the clouds, keep them nice and blue while we do our ink blending for the sun. And I put down a lot of pieces of painter's tape just to hold it down and also make sure I don't get any of this yellow on the sky or the clouds, because then we'll have a green sky instead of a nice blue sky. I'm going to use a couple reactive inks here. I have Lemon Drop and Creamsicle. I'm just going to create a really simple gradation here on the sun. This will create that illusion of roundness, and it'll just have a really bold look. Once I finish that gradation, I can then remove the mask, remove all of the tape, and all my ink blending is now done for this landscape. Actually, the whole landscape is done. Now we just have to fill it in with our images. I grabbed a couple kangaroos from the stamp set, and I'm going to stamp them here onto some white cardstock. I'm going to use the same colors we used for the ground. First ink them up with pumpkin pie and then stamp them. I'm going to ink them up a second time and stamp them one more just to make sure I have a nice solid image. Then I'm going to grab caramel and I'm going to partially ink up these kangaroos with caramel. To partially ink, you just hold your ink pad at an angle so a small portion of the ink pad actually comes in contact with the stamp, and that's going to create a nice little gradation when you stamp it. I'm going to do it one more time here just so it's a little bit bolder, and if I get any of that ink where I don't want it, I'll just use my finger to kind of remove that ink off of the stamp. You could definitely use a baby wipe if you prefer. And you can see it creates a nice little gradation for the kangaroos, and I think it just adds some more depth to the image. I'm now going to stamp a little plant here, a little bush. I'm going to ink it up first with fog and stamp it. Then I'm going to do some partial inking once more. I have moss here, just kind of angle that ink pad so only a little bit of the ink pad touches the bottom of the plant, and then stamp it. I'll do it one more time just to make sure I have a nice gradation, a more not so subtle gradation, a little bit more bold transition between the two colors. And now that I've completed that, I'll stamp the shrubs 2 more times, and then I'm going to die cut them out with the matching dies. And again, there's so many matching dies in this set that every image is basically there's a matching die for, which I think is wonderful. So I'm now arranged my image, and so all my die cuts, so I knew where my sentiment needed to go, and then I'm just going to ink it up in Intens-ified black ink, which is included in the kit, which is awesome, and then just stamp it on to that panel. I now have a card base here. This is an A2 top folding card base made out of sand cardstock turned on its side. Just added some liquid glue to the back side of our panel and centered it on the card front and stuck that down. Then I'll just add some liquid glue to the back side of all of our die cuts and stick those down as well, and just kind of create this little scene. I love the sentiment in this set too. It says "Happy Birthday to Rue," which I think is so cute and really perfect for these kangaroos. So just finished placing down my last shrub here, and now my card is complete. I'll now hold the card up to the camera so you can get a good look at all of the details that we've added to the card, the ink blended sky and sun that we created with masks that we made with the stencil, as well as the partial inking that we did on the images themselves, and even the ink spots that we did on the ground to really make it look like sand or dirt. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. Thank you so much for watching, and have a wonderful day.